There is a moment in your life that doesn't look dramatic from the outside, but quietly changes everything. A moment no one else would notice. No one claps. No one announces it. There is no spotlight, no sign, no clear line in the sand. And yet, somewhere deep inside, something soft and absolute clicks into place. You are no longer willing to keep being who you've been. The role you've played, the reactions you've repeated, the patterns you've carried for years. They stop fitting you in a way that is almost painful to feel. At first, it doesn't feel like a decision. It feels like a strange discomfort, like wearing clothes that used to be comfortable, but now itch against your skin. You catch yourself reacting in familiar ways, saying familiar things, walking familiar paths, and you feel a quiet resistance rise from somewhere deeper. A part of you that used to go along with everything is simply not agreeing anymore. The automatic responses don't fire the same way. The old justifications don't land the way they used to. You feel a gap between what you're doing and who you actually are now. And that gap keeps getting harder to ignore. You notice it in conversations you've had 100 times before. You hear yourself telling the same stories, defending the same limitations, laughing at the same jokes, and suddenly it all feels foreign, like you're listening to someone else use your voice. The words still come out of your mouth, but they don't feel true in your body. You feel yourself watching from somewhere just behind your own eyes, thinking, I don't believe this anymore. I don't live here anymore. Why am I still saying this? The performance keeps going, but the actor has already stepped off the stage. There's a quiet grief that comes with this. You might not realize it at first, but part of what you're feeling is mourning. Mourning the version of you who survived what they survived, who adapted, who did what they knew to do with the tools they had. You may not want to be that person anymore, but they kept you alive. They helped you navigate confusion, pain, fear, and uncertainty. Letting go of that old self doesn't mean they were wrong or bad. It means they are complete. Their work is done. And there is a tenderness in recognizing that. You also begin to see how much of your old self was built around things you never chose consciously. Expectations you absorbed, fears you inherited, stories that were handed to you before you had the chance to write your own. You notice the beliefs that were placed on your shoulders like heavy coats when you were too young to say no. You notice the ways you shrank to fit rooms that were too small for your real self. You notice the ways you took responsibility for things that were never yours to carry. And as you see it, you begin to understand this is not who you are, it's who you learn to be. Then comes the moment that actually changes your life. It doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives in the smallest of choices. A conversation where you choose silence instead of explaining yourself. A message you don't send. A habit you don't follow through on. A boundary you hold even when your old self would have abandoned it to keep the peace. A situation where you would have shrunk, apologized, or tolerated what hurts you. And you don't. You feel the familiar pull to act from your old identity, and instead of following it, you pause, you breathe, you stay, you choose differently. That pause is the moment you stop being your old self. It may feel uncomfortable, even wrong. Your nervous system is used to the old roots. It's used to people-pleasing, over-explaining, hiding, controlling, numbing, or performing. When you don't do what you always do, your body may interpret it as danger at first. There might be tension in your chest, a tightness in your throat, a feeling that you're about to lose something important. That is just the residue of the old wiring, trying to pull you back into what was once familiar. You're not doing something unsafe, you're doing something new. You might notice that the world doesn't instantly rearrange to applaud your choice. Some people in your life may not understand. They might expect the older version of you to show up. They might push the same buttons, speak the same lines, or try to hand you the costume you used to wear in their story. When you don't put it on, there may be friction, confusion, pushback. You might see disappointment in eyes that were used to you bending, shrinking, or absorbing what wasn't yours. This is where it's tempting to go back, to slip into the old self just to keep things simple. But if you stay with yourself here, something powerful happens. You begin to feel the difference between loyalty to your past and loyalty to your truth. You realize that continuing to be your old self just to make other people comfortable is a subtle form of self-abandonment. You see how often you chose peace on the outside while creating a quiet war inside. You recognize that your patterns weren't just habits. They were strategies to stay accepted, safe, or unseen. And now, this new version of you is no longer willing to trade your inner life for outer approval. As you keep choosing differently, your internal landscape starts to change. The thoughts that used to talk you out of your needs and your boundaries grow quieter. The harsh inner critic, the one who narrated every move with judgment, starts to lose its authority. The voice that always asked, "What will they think?" becomes less convincing. In its place, another voice grows steadier, one that asks, "What feels honest to me?" And, "What do I need in this moment to stay aligned with myself?" That voice has always been there. It just didn't have as much room before. There is often a stretch of time where you feel like you're standing in a hallway between two selves. You are no longer who you were, but not yet fully settled into who you're becoming. Old habits are fading, but new ones aren't automatic yet. old roles feel tight, but the new ways of being still feel awkward or unfamiliar. This in-between space can be lonely. It can be tempting to run back to what you know, even if it hurts, simply because it's familiar. But if you breathe and let yourself inhabit this hallway, it will slowly start to feel like home. In this space, you start to notice how your body responds to truth. There are conversations where your shoulders suddenly drop because you finally said what you actually feel. There are moments where you tell the truth to yourself about what isn't working, and your chest feels just a little more open. There are situations you step away from, and you realize afterward that your jaw isn't clenched, your stomach isn't tight, your heart isn't pounding, trying to protect you. These are the subtle signs that your system is recalibrating to a new normal, one where being yourself is no longer the exception, but the baseline. You also begin to feel the cost of slipping back into your old self more clearly. What once felt like just how things are now feels heavy, draining, or wrong almost immediately. When you agree to something that isn't aligned, your body tells on you faster. When you stay too long in places that diminish you, you feel the fatigue quicker. When you silence your truth to avoid discomfort, you feel the inner dissonance sooner. The time it takes for you to notice that you've left yourself gets shorter and shorter, until abandoning yourself is no longer tolerable, even for a moment. There is a quiet strength in this. You don't have to announce to the world that you've stopped being your old self. You don't need a declaration or a ceremony. The shift is registered in the way you move, the way you answer questions, the way you no longer force a version of you that doesn't exist anymore. You might still show up in the same places, with the same people, but your presence is different. There is more honesty in your yes, and more integrity in your no. You stop negotiating with your own soul for the sake of temporary comfort. Along the way, you might feel waves of doubt. You may ask yourself, who am I without this story? Without this role? Without these defenses? You may feel stripped, exposed, or like you're standing without the shield you've carried for years. That's because you are. You're learning to stand without armor in rooms where you used to hide behind it. It can feel raw, unfamiliar, and vulnerable. But underneath that vulnerability lives something else. A deeper, quieter confidence that isn't built on performance, but on presence. There will be memories that rise up to test you. Moments from your past where your old self had to adapt quickly to survive. Times when being small, agreeable, invisible, or accommodating kept you safe. When those memories surface, you might feel the urge to go back to those survival patterns as a way of honoring what you went through. But you honor your past self more fully by allowing them to rest. They handled what they had to handle. You are now living in a different chapter, with different tools and a different level of awareness. The moment you stop being your old self is not a single point in time. It's a series of small, sacred choices. The decision not to explain yourself when you feel misunderstood. The choice to leave a space when your body tightens instead of forcing yourself to stay and endure. The act of speaking your truth even when your voice trembles. The gentle refusal to participate in dynamics that drain you. Each decision is like a thread being pulled from the fabric of your old identity, until one day you realize the costume has come apart in your hands. You may look back at the old self with a mix of sadness and gratitude. Sadness for how long you lived in their shape, even after it started hurting. Gratitude for how they carried what you weren't yet ready to heal. Over time, your relationship with who you used to be becomes softer. You stop seeing them as a problem to fix and start seeing them as a phase of your becoming. Important, necessary, and complete. Eventually, you notice that your life feels different, even in the smallest routines. You wake up and feel just a little more at home in your own skin. You walk into spaces that once made you shrink and stand a little taller without forcing it. You hear your own laughter, and it sounds less like a mask and more like something real. You catch yourself making choices that the old you would have never believed you were allowed to make. You may still feel fear, uncertainty, or hesitation, but underneath it there is a quiet knowing. You are no longer willing to abandon yourself to maintain a version of you that no longer exists. This is the moment you stop being your old self. Not when everything is perfect. Not when you've healed every wound. Not when every trace of fear is gone. But when, in the middle of all of that, you begin choosing in alignment with who you are now instead of who you were taught to be. When your inner yes and no start guiding you more than habit or expectation. When your loyalty shifts from your past identity to your present truth. You don't have to rush this. You don't have to prove anything. You are allowed to grow at the pace that feels kind to your nervous system. You are allowed to be both tender and strong. You are allowed to feel unsure and still move forward. What matters is not that you never slip into old patterns again, but that when you do, you notice more quickly, forgive yourself more gently, and return to yourself more fully. The old self will fade, not because you fight it, but because you simply stop feeding it. You stop rehearsing old stories. You stop justifying what hurts you. You stop making a home in dynamics that require you to betray yourself. And little by little, a new version of you takes root. One that moves with more honesty, more clarity, more quiet power. One that knows you are allowed to live a life that fits who you really are. You are not losing yourself in this process. You are recovering yourself. The moment you stop being your old self is the moment you begin living as the person you've always been, beneath the roles, the stories, and the survival strategies. It won't look dramatic from the outside. No one may even notice. But you will know. Your body will know. Your life will know. And that knowing will shape everything that comes next.